Hello again, I'm Greg. So, some time ago, probably at least 15 years, maybe a little less than that, students called attention to me to what is now an old video game called Second Life. And it really was quite literally meant to be that a Second Life simulation where you would go through mundane activities and your daily round, like taking out the garbage and you got points for that, or cleaning the toilet and you got points for that. And I thought, well, I do that anyway, right, in my own life, right? And I might get a few points from my wife. Like I said in another video, there's not exactly a philosophical epigram, but one that is apt. It's like if you want to get laid, clean the toilet. Fine. And I think that most men today probably realize that. Some version of that is out there. But then why kind of spend hours playing a simulation when all these tasks need to be done anyway in your real life? Okay, that was my reaction at the time. But since then, right, there's been a bevy of very popular games, right? One that came across to me today was something called Power Wash Simulator, sold 17 million copies, all right? So, how many people playing Power Wash Simulator would actually want to have the job of being a power washer? It's kind of hard on the arms, for one thing. My experience with power washing is perhaps a little more interesting, a little more intriguing. We invented a system when I was living in Mississippi to do archaeology with, salvage archaeology, of course, not serious scientific archaeology, but we would just power wash off mud walls, clay, trenches, all the rest of it. You sort of have to set up a trench where your water can go, your water and your mud. But other than that, it was a brilliant thing, especially dealing with fragile artifacts made of glass and ceramic. You power wash it out of the mud wall, and it just comes falling right into your hand. And on top of that, it's already clean. So you get the whole thing at once, and you're pulling these beautiful 19th century, early 20th century pieces out of a midden, just using water. Okay, so you sort of might get your boots muddy, but not much else of you. All of that advantage. Okay, so but that was not a simulation. That was real life, and it was also not okay. I gotta wash my car or somebody's side of a building or whatever else real power wash employees do. Again, the question, why? All right, what it reminded me of, all of these, there's a number of these other games, and also even, like cookery games, chef games, things like that, which are not necessarily even involved other parts of plots like murder mysteries or whatever, because there are games like that as well, as you well know. What it called to mind in terms of my early studies in anthropology was a kind of self satire or projective satire against anxiety. Here are a whole bunch of games that are apparently very fun to play about things and tasks and scenes that, if we were to do them in real life, aren't fun at all, right? Um, Even though we might be getting paid a minimum to do them, it's still nowhere near as interesting as to get sort of fake remuneration in a simulation that's fun versus getting some minor real remuneration in reality for a job that is not fun. So, what's actually going on here? And it struck me that the only thing that I sort of knew about, because obviously I'm not from the video game generation per se, even though ours was the first generation to actually kind of play video games that were made for mass market. Okay, we're talking about the Atari 2600 here, right, folks? So this is like vintage collectible stuff here. Video Olympics and all of those things, skiing and all, trying to get over those moguls with your, with your joystick and all the rest of that. So yes, when I was 15, 16, the Atari 2600 had just come out. I'm dating myself here severely, but I think everybody knows. So in some ways, yes, Gen X was the first video game generation to play, first but we're not associated with that, right? Where it was a kind of a passing thing. The video game thing is something much more recent in terms of its global expanse and the idea that demographics have almost defined themselves around playing it, or at least being virtual and being digital. That's not Gen X, even though the origins are there. Um, but what it struck me as was if you go way back into traditional societies, social contract societies, we're talking about hunting and gathering, subsistence, sort of intensive subsistence societies like they had on the northwest coast of North America, um, and very, very basic societies, the most basic societies that we still know that have existed at least recently, and even within the last few years, there's been a few that have been discovered in the depths of the Amazon jungle, for example, where there's a few people still living like that, which is astonishing. Um, in these kinds of groups, right, pre-agrarian groups, their cosmology, their mythology has a heavy dose of satire of things that in reality are either really boring, okay, like power washing, for example, or they're just plain scary, like aspects of nature that groups like that had to contend with very simple and low level tech. Okay, that's what these games remind me of, and I'm just sort of on here throwing that out at you. That these video games and video games in general might be seen as a form of self satire. Even the more exciting kind of adventure games like Black Ops or GTA, there's a sense that if you were to have to do that for real, right? If you were a real criminal and your thing was, okay, I got to steal a Lamborghini and I'm going to get remunerated for that. Um, if, the big boss says that, okay, yeah, well, we've got too many of those, or sell it to somebody else, or I'm going to rip you off, or all the rest of it, or perhaps, okay, you stole it, great, I'm going to kill you now and I'll take it from you. For real, right, this stuff is very dangerous. It's scary, and nothing is more scary than combat. Okay, so if you're playing around with Black Ops and you're playing at it, then it can be kind of a thrill and it's fun. But of course, if you were to face it for real, it would be a very different story. Okay, even if you're a veteran out there and you're thinking, okay, yeah, I actually have done this. I've been in combat. And then maybe I've got a bit of an addiction problem. Maybe I'm sort of replaying something. But at the same time, maybe I'm trying to engage in therapy. I'm trying to sort of reassure myself that, yeah, I did these things. I saw these things. It was horrific, even dark in a way. If I can somehow work through these things by doing it in a fake way, in a virtual way, maybe I can feel better about this over time. So there may be a lot of things going on there, but the key issue is that we're projecting some kind of satirical, almost mocking visuality and mocking experience on something that in reality human beings either disdain, like the mundane, or we fear. Okay, a couple of examples, right? On the northwest coast, and I've talked about these things before. Raven, of course, is the great creator spirit. He's revered, and everyone on the northwest coast is considered to be a child of Raven. Raven discovers the first people in a clamshell on the beach, and yet, in many, many stories regarding Raven as the culture hero, he's sort of seen as this rather pompous, arrogant, naive kind of figure that's bumbling through, making all kinds of mistakes. Of course, the undertone there is that, okay, yeah, humans have to learn wisdom over the life course, and Raven seems no different, right? He's kind of a naive character, and then he goes through some adventure or other, and sometimes he learns, and sometimes he doesn't, right? And yet he's seen as a great powerful figure and the emblem of the mystical quality of nature that is in my homeland. In South America, we talked about the Amazon jungle. There, in the early societies, the pre-agrarian societies, It's Jaguar that's kind of like the king of the jungle, right? He's a very dangerous fellow, and if you encounter him, especially with your Neolithic equipment, you're probably going to lose and lose big time. So the jaguar then appears in these tales and these myths and fireside narratives as a kind of big bumbling oaf, like a real moron, and is guided by a tiny little bird who in reality is completely insignificant, right? Like you've heard the phrase bird brain before, right? This is another way that our early ancestors and our cousins are saying, okay, yeah, I mean, this really is, in reality, this is just plain scary and dangerous. So, how am I going to kind of make myself feel better about that? Because this is the reality, right? Well, I'm going to make fun of these natural figures. It could be polar bear, could be grizzly bear, could be jaguar. And we do not know if the really deeply indigenous groups living in, say, in the subcontinent or in China did the same with things like the tiger or the eastern lion or whatever, but we're suspicious, or we suspect indeed that they did. So we have so many examples ethnographically all around the world. So I'm going to just suggest that there's a link from this primordial period, right, where it's extremely low tech. Anything that we humans did, especially if we came up against nature, was like, oh yeah, we're going to lose this one, right? So, so in our cultural symbols, in our sensibility, in our narratives, we invent these sort of satirical or mocking kind of narratives where we're saying to these aspects of nature, okay, yeah, we're not afraid of you. You know, even though we are, we're going to make fun of you in the meantime and say, yeah, Jaguar, you're just a moron. And at the same time, it's like, okay, yeah, we don't want to meet you in the alley of the jungle anytime soon, right? And that link seems astonishingly, remarkably, but we're still human beings. We still have anxieties and fears. And even though most of those fears we have developed now for ourselves, right? They're not part of nature, they're part of culture. The anxieties and fears remain. So on the one side, this disdain and really, you know, to a certain extent, a fear, like who wants to be trapped in a power washing job for years on end, right? I mean, it's okay if you're 15, 16, you're doing that kind of job, it's your first job, don't worry about it, right? But if you're 25, 26, right, that's a different story. There is a real fear there. It's not just, oh, this is so boring, I'm going to fall asleep. There's something more to it than that. Okay, there's an anxiousness about it. Perhaps it could even lead to a desperation. And then, of course, in more severe circumstances, right? If I have a criminal career and maybe it's cool for a while. It's kind of a thrill when I'm young, and I don't think I can die. But that doesn't last very long, right? So if you're a drug courier at 15, okay, maybe there's a thrill to that. There's adventure. You're making a lot more money than your peers. You don't go to school, so you're sort of free from all of that. Yeah. What you're not free from, of course, is looking over your shoulder all day and maybe getting your head blown off, right? So there's a real sense of palpable fear there. And obviously in combat, needless to say, constant sense of alertness, anxiousness, and by that time, you're old enough to think that, yeah, I can die, and I could die at any moment. So all of this gets played out in the video game world these days. These are extremely popular video games where you wouldn't really expect it, right? Power Wash Simulator, what the hell is that, right? So I think that's what's going on. I think it's very deep, and it's deeper than we usually think about. So that's sort of the thought for today. Thanks for listening. Please comment. Many of you have played these games. It would be interesting to see what you're getting out of them and what you think of the sense that, hey, this loops back far, far back into our human ancestry, really almost to the very beginning of what we could call society at all. Thanks again.